Oh, hello, hello. I hope you're okay. Welcome, welcome to Geography with Mr. Shiel. Today we're going to be learning about zones of the world. Zones of the world sounds quite exciting, doesn't it? Zones of the world, because it is exciting. This is proper geography. This is proper kind of big brains geography. So you're going to learn loads of new words today, or you might know them already. But we're going to cover words that are quite long, quite technical, and so you're going to feel really clever at the end of this. To do this lesson, you probably need a bit of a sheet, really, printed off Google Classroom or handed out in Key Worker Provision if that's where you are. It's kind of got 3 different sections to it, and you kind of need that sheet to kind of talk you through this lesson, and we'll stop and we'll do a little bit of an activity, a bit like the history lessons if you've done the history lessons with me. So if you've got the sheet in front of you, well done, A+. You're already doing brilliantly. If you don't have the sheet yet, go get one, or you can sort of just draw it out if you like, do little diagrams as we go along, if that's not a possibility, okay? Anyway, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. Let's get on with some geography then. Okay, well, the first thing I guess we should talk about today is that we're going to learn about these different zones of the world. And we're going to learn about hemispheres. And that's quite a big word, hemispheres. And they're different to countries and they're different to continents. They're a bit bigger, really. We'll learn about what they are in just a second, but we're going to find out what the North and South Hemisphere actually means. We're going to learn about the equator. The equator, great word, like saying that. Equator, you have a go at that, like equator. Equator. Sounds better every time you say it. We're going to learn about longitude and latitude, and we're going to learn about the 5 major lines of latitude in these zones of the world. So this is proper geography, this is. It'll be really clever after this. All right, okay, let's start at the beginning, right? Let's start with this picture of the Earth. I hope you can see it. And we've got to imagine that the Earth has got a north bit and a south bit. And the top of the Earth, the most northerly point, we call the North Pole. And the bottom of the Earth, the most southerly point, we call it the South Pole, okay? And this equator that you can see on the board, this equator, is kind of like an imaginary line. It doesn't really exist. So if you go to the halfway point in the world, which is where the equator is, by the way, if you go halfway between the North Pole and South Pole, there's not a line drawn across the ground saying, here's the equator, and it goes all the way around the world. No, we have to imagine it, okay? So the equator is an imaginary halfway line between the North Pole and the South Pole, okay? And an equator divides the planet, the entire planet, by the way, into a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere. And the Earth, right, the Earth is widest at the equator. And you can see that from the picture. It gets well, narrower as it curves down towards the pole or curves up towards the North Pole. So the equator is kind of the line, the imaginary line that goes halfway up the world, okay? And it divides the world into north and south hemispheres, all right? There's that word hemispheres that we talked about just a while ago. Now, latitude and longitude are some other words that we introduced just at the beginning. I said they're really technical words. And basically, longitude, latitude are kind of the names we've given to sort of imaginary lines. So the world's been kind of divided up, okay, into sections by these lines of latitude and longitude. And it's all to help us locate places in the world. So these lines were created to help kind of find out, well, how south or how north, how west or how east, okay? To find out how far north or south a place is, we use lines of latitude, and they run kind of side to side. And you can see it in this diagram on the left-hand side, the latitude. And the line of latitude that's halfway up, we've just come across it, the equator, okay? The equator, and that's the one directly in the middle. Now, to find how far east or west some place is, we've got the lines of longitude, which are those long lines that go from the north to the south of the planet. There we go, you can see them on the right-hand side here as well. So lines of latitude go side to side, and the lines of longitude go up and down, okay? Good so far. And the important thing is to know is they're just imaginary. They don't exist in real life. If you go into space and look back at Earth, it hasn't got these orange lines drawn all over it. It's something we created as humans to help us tell how far north or how far south or how far west is. And it gives us a frame of reference. Okay? So we've got a picture here. You can see the equator, that central line of latitude. Then we've got the northern hemisphere, which is everything north of the equator, and the southern hemisphere, which is everything south. And again, a half each. The equator is at the center of the lines of latitude and is at what we call 0 degrees latitude. Okay? Where do you think the UK is? Would you say that's in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere? What do you think? In fact, you might be able to see from the picture on the screen. You might, if you're really eagle-eyed, you know, if you're really eagle-eyed, you look really closely, you might see where the UK is. All right? Is it in the north or is it in the south? What do you think? Tell me now. Yes, yes, you're spot on. If you said northern hemisphere. If you said southern hemisphere, try again. Try again, you'll probably get it right next time, okay? What about Antarctica? Antarctica at the very southern, oh, I gave it away. Well, it's the most southerly point of the planet Earth, Antarctica. So of course it's in the southern hemisphere. I'm pretty sure you said southern hemisphere there, pretty sure. Anyway, the northern hemisphere. Here's some facts about the northern hemisphere. I like some of these facts, by the way. These are good facts. The part of the Earth north of the equator, we know that. It's northern hemisphere. Okay, we know that now. 80% of the world's population, 8 out of 10 people on Earth, live in the northern hemisphere. 90% of the land on Earth is in the northern hemisphere. And it includes all of North America, all of Europe, most of Asia, and most of Africa. Right? Not all of Asia and Africa, but most of it. Okay? The southern hemisphere, good facts coming up too. The part of the Earth south of the equator, we know that. It's called the southern hemisphere. We know the equator is that sort of imaginary halfway line. We know that now. Only 20% of the world's population lives in the southern hemisphere. 2 out of 10 people. 90% of the planet's water is in the southern hemisphere. So it's kind of like a mirror image. In the northern hemisphere, 90% of the land. In the southern hemisphere, 90% of the water. And it includes all of Australia, all of Antarctica, and a big chunk, most of South America. Okay? And little fact, did you know? When it's winter in the southern hemisphere, it's summer in the northern hemisphere. Okay? And that's why if you live in Australia, on a Christmas day, you're more likely to be out in your shorts and vest having a barbecue than you are being all in a Christmas jumper, all huddled up and warm and drinking hot chocolate. Yeah, it's true. Right. This is a map of the world. I've kind of spread the Earth flat now in this diagram. You can see all the continents, North and South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, and Antarctica, the big, long, white one down the bottom there. Can you have a look now? Have a little look. What continents are completely in the south? What continents are completely in the north? You might have had a little clue from the last slide that I showed you. You can see, obviously, look, the equator, that halfway line of latitude. And actually, on this one, we can see the halfway line of longitude. And that's called the prime meridian. And in our next geography session, we'll talk a little bit more about the prime meridian, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves just now. Okay? So, on your sheet, you've got this diagram that says zones of the Earth, and we've got 5 lines coming off it, okay? Let's just make this clear. Now, what I'd like you to do, we're going to get really technical now. Let's spread this out a bit so we can see. We've got a diagram here to help. There are 5 major lines of latitude in the world. Now, the equator, obviously, is a big one. It's in the center, it's halfway along. The equator, it's one of the major lines of latitude, okay? But we also have 4 others. And from top to bottom, it goes. The Arctic Circle is a really important line of latitude. The Tropic of Cancer is the next one down, a really important line of latitude. Then we've got the equator. Then we've got something called the Tropic of Capricorn underneath the equator. And then right at the bottom, we've got the Antarctic Circle. And those are the 5 major lines of latitude. Again, those imaginary lines that tell us how north or south something is. Okay, so the Tropic of Cancer and the Arctic Circle are in the northern hemisphere, and the Tropic of Capricorn and the Antarctic Circle are in the southern hemisphere. So if you'd like, pause the video and can you fill out the diagram on the top of your sheet before you move on, okay? Because those are the 5 major lines of latitude, those imaginary lines that we talked about. Okay, let's pause now. Did you pause? You ready to move on? What was that? I think you're ready to move on. Let's go. Now, the Tropic of Cancer. Again, an imaginary line in the northern hemisphere. It's also called the Northern Tropic. It's the furthest north you can ever go and still have the sun directly overhead. And that just happens once a year in June. And it's called the solstice. Okay? So that's the Tropic of Cancer. Okay? The Tropic of Capricorn, which is south of the equator, that's an imaginary line in the southern hemisphere. And it's the opposite of the Tropic of Cancer. Similar to that, it's the furthest south you can go and still have the sun directly overhead. And that happens once in a year in December. And that's also called the solstice. Okay. Now, what I'd like you to do here is we've got a little table on your sheet with different places. Places like Antarctica and South Africa and North America. And what I'd like you to do on that table is tick what hemispheres it is in. And I've done the first one for you. So Antarctica, you can see that I've ticked it because it's in the southern hemisphere. You can see here it's in the southern hemisphere. It also covers the west and east hemisphere, which is divided by the prime meridian, that line of longitude. So I would tick Antarctica for being in the southern hemisphere. I'd also tick it for being in the west and the east, but I'd put a cross for the north. Antarctica is not in the northern hemisphere, not even a little bit. Okay, so I've put a cross there as well, and you can see that on your sheet. And what I'd like you to do is work through those other places. You'd probably help if you pause this video so you can have a look at this map on your screen. That will really help. And you can see places like North America or South Africa. South Africa, the very southernmost point of Africa. And you can decide what hemispheres these places are actually in. And work through the places, see what you think, and see if you get them right. Okay, so pause the video there, have a look at your table, and then discuss that with an adult if you need to. All right, and when you're ready to carry on, carry on. Now, the North Pole is another part of the Northern Hemisphere. It's the northernmost point on Earth. All right, there's no land at the North Pole. There's no land at the North Pole, only ice. And the ice is about 3 meters thick. And nobody owns the North Pole. Nobody owns it. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's in what we call international waters. And in the summer, the sun never sets at the North Pole. And on the picture here, you can see the North Pole, the northernmost point, and you can see the dotted line, the Arctic Circle, the sort of line of latitude, one of the 5 major lines of latitude there, the Arctic Circle. All right. The South Pole is the southernmost place on Earth, and it's located on land topped by more than 2,700 meters of solid ice. The South Pole is much colder than the North Pole. In fact, it's the coldest place on Earth. Okay, there's a scientific base there on Antarctica with about 50 to 200 scientists who live there and work there, but only, not all the time, not for years and years, because it's just so hard to live there when it's so cold. All right, that's the South Pole. We call that the Antarctic Circle, the last major line of latitude there. All right, our final matching activity today, and then we're done. We've learnt loads. Okay, so here you've got the sort of some of these lines of latitude that we talked about. So we've got the Tropic of Cancer, the equator, the Antarctic Circle, the Southern Hemisphere, the Arctic Circle, the Northern Hemisphere, the Tropic of Capricorn, the lines of latitude. And all of these things, all of these labels have got meanings on the right left-hand side. And what I'd like you to do is try and match up the labels, the titles, with the meanings. Okay, so the Antarctic Circle and the equator. Have a look and see which one matches. Okay, so that's really good. And that will take you through to the end of the session. All right, let's have a look here. I've got some lovely little facts here that I just wanted to show you. My text has gone a bit weird. So last little facts. I'll tell you what, I'll go back one. You can pause here if you want to before you move on, or I'll just jabber on about these interesting facts if you like. So the equator, Earth is widest at the equator. We discussed that earlier. It's just under 25,000 miles long, the equator, 25,000 miles. And it crosses the land or waters of 14 different countries. And half, about maybe even a little bit more than half of the planet's rainforests are located along the equator line. Okay, it's an interesting fact about rainforests there. Now, good luck with your learning today. I hope you have sort of like a handle on what a hemisphere is when we talk about those halves of the Earth. So the northern hemisphere being the northern half and the southern hemisphere basically being the southern half. The equator being that imaginary line that goes around the middle of the Earth. It's a latitude line, and they go from north to south, and they tell us how north or south things are. Then we've got lines of longitude, which go up and down. And the central line of longitude is called the prime meridian. Okay, so we had the equator, the central line of latitude, and the prime meridian, the central line of longitude. Yeah, that's proper geography stuff, that is. Right, good luck learning that vocabulary. We'll kind of cover that again when we do our next geography lesson and just go over it a little bit. But otherwise, good luck with the sheet. Have a great day. See you soon. Bye.